right, welcome in to another edition of the Second Half Draft Show. I am your host, Juice, flying solo this evening, and it almost seems appropriate. It almost seems appropriate considering the fact that Miami has made its way into the national championship. As you can see, Canes fan, look behind me, you can see the gears. You know who I'm rocking with, but of course, the Second Half Draft Show. The emphasis typically is on the NFL draft, right? That's what we're passionate about here. There's obviously NFL draft implications associated with the national championship. Quite a few players on either team are going to continue to be able to improve their stock, not just through the national championship, and the corresponding outcome and their performance, but going into the pre-draft process, right? The Senior Bowl, Shrine Game, Combine, so on and so forth, pro days, the whole nine, right? We're really getting into the heart of draft season here shortly. I will be traveling to Mobile in just a few short. I'm not even a few short weeks, less than 2 weeks now. I'll be traveling to Mobile, covering the Senior Bowl once again. We typically do that here, um, associated with the flagship channel, Couch Potato General Manager, but all associated with the Second Half Draft Show. So I'll report back on the sights and sounds there, who helped themselves, who hurt themselves, so on and so forth. But lot of news, lot of happenings in the football world over the last week or so. Of course, no show last week, but back this week, and want to talk a little bit about the national championship, as I mentioned, as well as the NFL playoffs. Want to talk about that as well. We've seen some coaching changes, transfer portal, interesting news coming out of that, underclassmen declaring, so on and so forth. So again, lot to cover this evening. I'm going to try to keep it fairly concise, all things considered, because obviously it's just my voice, and you don't want to belabor um, one person talking ad nauseum here. So with that said, obviously, right, at the top, the tip of the spear is the national championship matchup between Miami versus Indiana, and it very much seems like strength on strength, right? When you think about how these teams are comprised or how they play. Miami obviously wants to control the line of scrimmage. Indiana has been a very physical football team. That's what has jumped out to me throughout the balance of this season when watching the Hoosiers. The same thing with Miami. These teams are more physical than the vast majority of their opponents or all their opponents. I do think back, obviously being a Canes fan, I've watched every single game. I do think back, and I think the only game that I watched where Miami got beat up, they got beat up. Ultimately, it resulted in a loss, a 3-point loss at home to Louisville. But I thought Louisville was just more physical during that particular contest. The way they filled at the line of scrimmage in terms of Miami trying to run duo and power and so on and so forth. Of course, again, like I said, Miami wants to lean on you with that big offensive line and wear you down. And I thought the way their second level and even third level defenders were coming down and meeting, pulling guards in the hole and stacking and shedding defenders, I thought it was really impressive. And that's the only time I've really seen Miami out physical at the point of attack. From Indiana's perspective, the only time I really saw that was in the matchup against Iowa early in the season. Now, mind you, Indiana did manage to come away with a win, but I thought Iowa took it to Indiana in that contest, and it was one of the closer matchups that Indiana had this season. That and then when I think about the matchup itself, when I think about these two teams, and like I said, I think there's a lot of parallels in terms of how they want to play football and how they want to impose their will. Um, it's going to come down to the line of scrimmages, right? Miami again has that massive offensive line. I think on average, Indiana's giving up about 50 pounds per player. Now, that doesn't tell the whole story, right? Technique, leverage, tenacity, all of that comes into play. But you wonder whether or not Miami can lean on the Hoosiers defensive line, whom again, like I said, is a very physical group. Their front seven is very physical. Can they avoid a situation where, like I said, Louisville took it to Miami's offensive line? So that's something I'll be paying particular particularly close attention to. I think obviously one of the main storylines is going to be Fernando Mendoza, who's the Heisman Trophy winner and prohibitive favorite to be the first overall selection. I think it makes a ton of sense. Las Vegas Raiders should go in that direction. He's played phenomenally, right? What he does in the red zone, as I mentioned during a mock draft on Couch Potato General Manager, um, his accuracy, the fact that he can make most all the throws, he has the requisite arm talent, and he gives you something in terms of his legs, right? He's a good decision maker, and he understands when he can tuck, and he's got some wheels on him. He's got some wheels on him. I saw, not sure who it was, but I saw someone mention that Mendoza's Jared Goff with wheels, right? And I've always maintained that Goff is a very good quarterback, very good pass, pocket pass. Perhaps not elite, but very good. If he had Mendoza's athleticism, you're talking about an upper echelon quarterback. He's already top 10, right? And he's had a consistent amount of success. He's been with the Detroit Lions, and certainly throughout his career he's had success. But Mendoza, as I mentioned, certainly is earned and demonstrated why he should be the first overall selection in the NFL draft. And then you juxtapose it against Miami's quarterback situation with Carson Beck. Now, just a short while ago, entering the 2024 season, Beck was QB1 for most. Most had Beck as a top quarterback prospect. Now that changed, right? He had a very much of a up and down season associated with the Bulldogs, and of course, Cam Ward having made his transition to Miami, playing behind that quality offensive line, really put the football world on its ears. And I anticipated that because again, we started the show talking about Miami's offensive line and offensive line play in general. I anticipated that Cam Ward was going to play behind one of the better offensive lines that he's ever played with. In fact, the best offensive line. Of course, you fast forward, Cam Ward ends up being the first overall pick. Beck has Tommy John surgery, has a significant injury. He doesn't really get to live practice until the fall. But it's come together. It has come together, and he has played winning football. Right. By no means has it been perfect. He's missed some opportunities, but generally speaking, he's protected the football. He's made good decisions, and when Miami has needed Beck the most, he has made plays. Now, Beck was on the trajectory that Mendoza is actually on, right? Mendoza has actually, kind of stamped it. I don't think anything barring some catastrophic injury is going to change the fact that Fernando Mendoza will be the first overall selection. I don't see it playing out any other way. Beck's NFL prospects are different, right? It has changed substantially since that the beginning of the 2024 year. I think he's more of a day three prospect, honestly. At times you feel like, okay, you might want to invest a day two selection, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I see the requisite arm strength on a consistent basis, particularly pushing the football down the field. Now, it may be the fact that Beck puts too much air under the ball and not necessarily arm strength, but I don't see the elasticity in his arm that he had prior to the injury. So while I think Beck might be a decent backup spot starter, I don't know that he's going to necessarily develop into a guy that you can lead your football team at the NFL level week in and week out. I just don't. I'm not convinced of it, despite how well he's played during these here playoffs and some of the peaks he's had throughout his career. Again, prior to the injury, I think you saw again more arm elasticity and the various arm slots, arm talent, just in general, right? The decision making has always been a bit of a question mark, but the arm talent was there. I don't know that he's gotten back or will ever get back to that level of arm talent. And I think that's what NFL scouts, NFL draft prognosticators were looking at it. We're thinking about ultimately when Beck was considered a first round selection. So that's another storyline, right? In terms of the quarterbacks in this particular matchup, we talked about the line of scrimmage, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. I think Indiana boasts a quality offensive line as well. I think the difference is Miami's individual pass rushers are greater than Indiana's. Now, the collective front seven, the way Indiana has played, especially how they've married it up with the back end, is very impressive. It's very impressive. And I think And I hope, as a Miami fan, that Beck understands that what you see pre-snap is not what you're going to get post-snap with Indiana. They do a really good job of disguising things. And I would expect a seasoned veteran quarterback like Beck to be able to pick up some of those things, the coaching staff be able to mitigate that, but it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge, right? Establishing the line of scrimmage, running the football is going to be big for either team in my mind. The other thing I look at when I think about this particular matchup is whether or not Miami can avoid giving up the big play. I thought about this a lot during the Ole Miss matchup, and Ole Miss did manage to get some splash plays, some quick scores, right? Indiana has definitely demonstrated the ability to get vertical, right? They use Becker, they use Cooper. Surratt is more that short to intermediate possession type, but he's incredibly effective in the red zone as well. But Indiana and Mendoza have done a great job. That they're completing those explosives, those 20+ yardage plays at a fairly high clip, right? And if Miami's young defensive backs, they do have a collection of young defensive backs with a smattering of veterans in there between my guy, the slot demon. His name is escaping me. I can't believe it's Keontae Scott, and then Jacoby Thomas, the safety. Those are your seniors, but there's a lot of younger underclassmen in this defensive backfield, and some of those guys are banged up as well. They're not necessarily 100%. So Miami's got to be able to keep Indiana in front of them. And I don't think it's because Indiana is faster than Miami. I think they just pick their spots and they're very effective at it. I wonder too about whether or not Miami can force field goals as opposed to giving up 6 or 7, right? I mentioned how effective Mendoza and this Indiana offense is in the red zone. It's a matter of execution and play design, right? And the more often you can turn Indiana away and force them to trot their field goal unit out on the field, obviously the better chances you have as a Hurricanes team. It's the same thing on the Hurricane side of the field. If they can finish drives, that's going to bode well in terms of their overall chances. Whereas kicking field goals, albeit I have confidence in the kicking game, that's not the way you want to play against a team like Indiana that's having so much success and is as explosive as they are. If you're trading threes for sevens or sevens for threes, it's not going to go particularly well. So just a couple keys. Obviously, turnover margin always plays a key role. It's one of those things it's a foregone conclusion as far as I'm concerned. When you talk about any matchup, let alone the national championship, any matchup, the winner of the turnover margin typically is going to be on the winning side of the equation, right? Time of possession, at times plays a role. I think Miami does want to play ball control. I think Indiana can play ball control, but they're perfectly fine, going up and down the field. Overall, I actually think Miami matches up really well against Indiana. I worried a bit more in terms of Miami holding up against Ole Miss's offense because of the tempo. Miami does not always handle tempo that well. I imagine Kurt Signetti, this Indiana Hoosiers coaching staff, recognizes that, and they're going to have some wrinkles, and they're going to go fast at times. And Miami's going to have to kind of try to mitigate that balance. That you got a lot of emotions, a lot of energy. You kind of gotta have to settle yourself, otherwise you'll run out of energy. You know what I'm saying? You'll be so hyped that you will burn off all of the reserves that you have. I expect, despite Indiana's quality offensive line, I expect Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor to have big games, and they're going to have big games in order to mitigate again this explosive Indiana offense led by Fernando Mendoza. One of the things that I thought Ole Miss did well in terms of adjusting to Miami's pass rush was moving the pocket, right? Now, I don't know that Mendoza is great in terms of throwing on the run. I think he's good, but I don't think he's great in terms of throwing on the run. I think Trinidad Chandler's actually is a better quarterback, in terms of delivering the football on the move. But if you give Mendoza time, he's going to dissect you, right? So I need. I'm using the term I because again, Canes fan. I need Bain and Mesidor to get home, right? And I think this game in particular is a significant one for Akeem Mesidor. I've talked about him previously. obviously excellent pass rusher. He's developed into an excellent pass rusher. He really transferred from West Virginia several years ago. He was more of a 4-eye 5 technique, big hold up at the point of attack, two gap, and over time he's changed his body composition. Working with Jason Taylor, he's turned into a terrific pass rusher. Can he force his way into that first round conversation? Right. I know folks are, really like Romello Heights and some of the traits that he possesses as far as his arm length and how that can create challenges for opposing offensive tackles. But when I talk about production, when I talk about consistency, I really like Mesidor. I'm leaning towards Mesidor. Both are going to be older rookies, right? They're going to turn 25 during their rookie season. So that may create pause for certain organizations. Certain organizations want that second contract to be paid out when the guys are around 25, 26. In the case of Romello Height and Mesidor, we're talking closer to 30, 29, 30 at that point. So that may be a detractor, but I think in terms of just how they're playing, certainly both should be considered first round selections. And I'm leaning towards Mesidor over Romello Height. What else in this particular game, man? What else comes to mind as relates to this matchup? I know there were a couple of other thoughts that I had. I really do, and I talked about NFL draft implications, and I mentioned Mesidor. Of course, Ruben Bain, I expect him to go top 10. I know folks are going to question his arm length, but just turn the tape on, man. Turn the tape on. Anywhere from three technique all the way to the wide nine. Whatever you want him to do, I think he's going to excel at it. Mendoza first overall pick, obviously. I really like some. I mentioned Keontae Scott and Jacoby Thomas. I think these guys have done a ton for their respective draft stock. Right, Keontae Scott is my favorite nickel in the class. To me, he's a top 50 player. And I don't think that enough people are talking about how good of a player he is, whether it be, attacking the line of scrimmage, blitzing, being that third linebacker, because everybody plays five defensive backs these days. Everybody's trying to match up with 11 personnel, spread offenses. You have lighter boxes. So you need your nickel to be physical at the point of attack, set a physical edge, be able to tackle in space, blitz the quarterback, and obviously hold up in coverage. And Keontae Scott, he checks all the boxes. Keontae Scott of the big INT pick six against Ohio State during the quarterfinals. He's made plays throughout the entire season. It's not just in these playoffs. He's been a difference maker from week one. So he certainly has helped himself. I think Jacoby Thomas, transfer from Tennessee, has done a lot to help his draft stock. I think he's a mid-round selection in terms of what he does, in terms of bringing physicality, a physical presence to the secondary, but also what he's done in coverage has been very impressive. Going from a part-time player to a full-time starter, the leadership that he's brought to that back end of the defense has been impressive. And I think he's definitely helped his draft stock. I go over to Indiana's secondary, and got to talk about D'Angelo Ponce, who's actually from the Miami area. He played for Kurt Cignetti at James Madison, followed Kurt Cignetti to Indiana. Undersized defensive back, but you talk about ball skills and technique and football IQ, man. He checks all those boxes, and I'm going to relax those benchmarks, right? In terms of size, speed. I'm going to relax that a little bit because he's such a good football player, right? Again, understanding that he's a bit undersized, I think 5'9", maybe 180. That's on the smaller side, even for a defensive back. That's on the smaller side, but he plays so much bigger than that, man. Plays so much bigger than that. The other element of the game, it just came to me that I wanted to talk about was Miami's tendency, Corey Heatherman, the defensive coordinator's tendency to blitz. He is aggressive, right? He's going to send guys. You understand what I'm saying? And Fernando Mendoza's demonstrated ability to counter the blitz, right? He's put up some gaudy numbers when opposing teams decide to blitz him. I think his TD to pass to INT ratio is like 20-21-0 against the blitz. So when you blitz, you could be playing zone, but generally speaking, you play man, right? I think when you don't disguise it effectively, when he can he can process and understand where it's coming from and understand throw into that void and take advantage of that. He's got the weapons on the perimeter. Surratt catches everything, back shoulder, contested, doesn't matter. He catches it. You got to be careful with that. I think Miami, or rather Corey Heatherman, is kind of picked up this habit of we're gonna blitz. This is who we are. We're gonna blitz. Doesn't matter if it burns us, it burns us. I think you got to be a little bit more measured, right? I thought throughout the balance of that game against Ole Miss, they started to kind of see it coming. We weren't disguising it well when the nickel was coming off the edge, when we were sending a backer. I'm okay. You want to line, Basaint and Torre in that A gap blitz, and then bring, Keontae Scott off the edge. You got to mix it up. You got to mix it up. I understand that, but I do want to see just a little less blitzing because the reality is that you need Bain and Mesidor to do their thing. Ahmad Moten, Justin Scott, Lightfoot. Let those horses do their thing. Let's find out whether or not Indiana's offensive line can protect against four. Right? Let's find out. Pick your spots. I'm not suggesting you don't blitz at all, but pick your spots. I don't think you can live and die by the blitz against Mendoza in this offense. All right. So with that said, I wanted to say it with respect to the college football landscape, right, and what it means for the NFL draft. So I'm going to take a look at a list of underclassmen that have declared for the NFL draft. Now, mind you, this is an incomplete list. This list will grow, but certainly there's at least one scenario, one team that I think it's important to, or player, I should say, it's important to discuss because his decision to actually stay in school reverberates. It most certainly reverberates in terms of the 2026 NFL draft and really changes the corresponding landscape. So let me just zoom in here so you can see some of the names. I'm on ESPN and they've got a tracker going here. So just looking at some of these are quality football players, and I think it makes a ton of sense for them to enter the NFL draft. Keith Abney could find his way into the bottom half of the first round. CJ Allen is a favorite of mine. I think he's definitely worthy of a first round pick. Aaron Anderson, Drew talked about Aaron Anderson prior to the season when we were doing our top 15 receivers entering the 2025 draft. A smaller receiver, but very effective in the slot. Denzel Boston, I think he's gotten a bit of first round buzz. He could go in the first round. Parker Braceford, Zachariah Branch, Chris Brazzell had a tremendous season. I think because Tennessee didn't make the playoffs, kind of out of sight, out of mind, but he had a remarkable season and often strength of that entering the NFL draft. Brandon Cisse, I actually got an opportunity to watch some film of him today. It was really my first foray in watching all 22 of him, right? I've seen him a couple times when I've watched South Carolina, just, as casually watching them. But now having had an opportunity to watch him, I think certainly the buzz around him is warranted. The movement skills are really impressive, really impressive movement skills. He's a younger player. He transferred from NC State, has played a lot of football over the course of the last few seasons, but he's still a very young player. I think he'll be 20 entering the draft. So teams, there are certain organizations that lean towards the younger traits driven prospect as opposed to perhaps a more accomplished older prospect. Now, I won't say that Cisse isn't accomplished. He is, but really, really impressed by his movement skills. Kind of reminded me a little bit about Marshawn Lattimore. Casey Concepcion, Caleb Downs, of course, one of the best players in the country. Jack Andrews, Spencer Fano, should hear his name fairly certain. Keldrick Falk as well. Anthony Hill Jr. Anthony Hill Jr. is probably seeing his stock diminish a bit. But I don't know how NFL teams feel about it. I think overall Texas didn't play particularly well. Hill did not have the greatest of seasons. He was a top 15 kind of pick going into the season, at least from a mock draft perspective. I wonder how things shake out from there. I had been focusing on the cornerbacks. Colton Hood is another one that his name is being bandied about there towards the end of the first round. Often you see him ending up with the Seahawks. I know they have some question marks in terms of the secondary as far as contracts are concerned. Hood is another good one. One of the things that stood out to me, and I was sharing this with Drew and Headley earlier today via chat, was I'm really impressed by this cornerbacks class willingness to actually challenge receivers at the line of scrimmage. It's always been a bit of a pet peeve of mine, certainly over recent years, that you have all of this press bail technique, mirror and match, and defensive backs never get their hands on the receiver, never try to redirect, never try to jam, never disrupt the passing game at the line of scrimmage, not taking advantage of those first 5 yards. But this crop, especially towards the top of the draft board, you talk about um, uh, Mansour Delaney and Jamal McCoy, who we didn't see this season, but of course last year he had a phenomenal season for Tennessee. Hood transfers from Colorado, goes to Tennessee, but he and Cisse and some of these other guys, they do a good job. They do a good job of really jamming those receivers and disrupting timing and I think you have to do that if you're going to have success at the NFL level. I think you can get away with a lot of that mirror and matching at the collegiate level, but at the NFL level, I think you absolutely have to mix it up and challenge receivers. Otherwise, it's just going to be pitch and catch, right? It's the one time you have free reign to beat up some of those receivers, and if you give free releases with the level of athleticism and pass catching in the league these days, it's going to be a long day for you. So I really like this crop of defensive backs, these corners, in terms of their play at the line of scrimmage. Hood, in particular, I mentioned Cisse and his movement skills. What I like about Hood is really how patient he is at the line of scrimmage. It makes his ability to disrupt so much more effective, right? He's getting his hands on you. And you saw that Colorado a season ago. Of course, the focus is on Travis Hunter, but you look on the other side, and Colton Hood is a good player in his own right, and he really broke out this year at Tennessee. Really appreciate how patient and how he trusts his technique. I think he's ready made. I think he's ready made. I think he can make an immediate impact for an NFL team. Vega Ione, Emmett Johnson. I think you have perhaps a not the best running back class. Emmett Johnson, I think he understands that there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity here, considering there may be a bit of a dearth of talent at the running back position entering the 2026 NFL draft. I'll say this, though. I think it'll be a good free agent class among running backs, guys in their mid-20s whom still have a lot of tread on the tires. So it'll be interesting to see how that whole dynamic plays out. Jalen Kilgore is a name we've seen for quite some time. Max Clare, Jacoby Lane, and Makai Lemon. So Lemon obviously established himself as the guy, and currently I have Lemon as my second ranked receiver. I actually have him ahead of Carnell Tate. I know quite a few people feel like Carnell Tate is the best receiver in this class. I think I have him at 3. I think I have him comfortably at 3rd among the receivers in this class. Jacoby Lane was supposed to be the guy. We did or rather Drew did an expose on Lane on our flagship channel, Couch Potato General Manager, and it just never materialized. Lane dealt with some injuries. He had some good games, but Makai Lemon stole the show. Makai Lemon stole the show. Lane enters the draft with his star perhaps not shining as brightly as we thought it would, but he's a very, very intriguing prospect on day 2. I think if Lane had the season that we were anticipating, he could very well have been the top receiver off the board, right? That's what we were expecting of Jacoby Lane. Again, it did not materialize. Makai Lemon is the one who really led that passing attack. But I think Lane entering the draft, despite not necessarily having his best performance, really bolsters this receiving class. I think it's a quality receiving group. I don't know that you have the absolute stud out there, but depth, top to bottom, very good receiving class. Connor Lew, Caleb Lomu. So that's both tackles out of Utah. Kyle Louis, Jeremiah Love, clearly the top running back in the class. I mentioned McCoy, Caden McDonald, and Christian Miller, right? I've talked about it over the last couple of seasons in terms of how the pendulum is swinging back towards, you know, 21 personnel and 12 personnel and physicality and gap schemes and power, right? The running game between the tackles, you know what I'm saying? And you need guys like Caden McDonald and Kristen Miller who could hold up at the point of attack. absorb double teams, allow second level defenders to flow to the football and make plays at or behind the line of scrimmage. So you see those names when you look at mock drafts and you're working through them. You look at the compositions of various NFL teams, and they need those types of players, right? I think Miller probably gives you a little bit more in terms of the pass rush, but as far as two down players, Caden McDonald and Kristen Miller certainly are among the best in this class. TJ Parker or Harold Perkins Jr. I did not expect Jadarian Price to declare, but it bodes well for this running back group. We have a tendency to kind of get enamored with Jeremiah Love, but Darian Price is phenomenal. His backup, it's kind of a 1A, 1B situation, right? I think what Love, at least the opportunity. I don't know. I could be wrong about this, but I think Love has demonstrated more, obviously, in terms of the passing game, like more versatile of a weapon. That may just be a usage situation. I could be wrong, but Jadarian Price, in terms of being a ball carrier, is very effective. Every bit as effective as Jeremiah Love. So I like seeing his name in there. Caden Proctor, Kamari Ramsey, Arvell Reese, of course. Kenyon Sadiq. I think he's going to go fairly early, especially if he runs well. If Kenyon Sadiq runs well, he's going to go fairly early. Ty Simpson. Let's talk about Ty Simpson a little bit, right? He was courted by a number of college teams, including my Hurricanes. Kind of thinking about that portal quarterback, right? You want to put yourself in a position to compete for the college football playoff every year. Having an experience or quarterback who has good film certainly helps with respect to that. I think this is a power play by Simpson, right? Particularly, and I'll get to the name. I buried the lead. I'm going to get to the name, particularly with a certain quarterback out west deciding to go back to school. Ty Simpson, clearly the way it ended, whether it be the SEC championship or the blowout loss to the Hoosiers, Indiana, during the college football playoffs, he hasn't acquitted himself particularly well here towards the end of the season. And I thought there were too many instances where Simpson did not play at a high level. But when you take a step back and you look at his numbers, you look at what he does well, particularly when he's protected, that there's a lot to like there as well. I personally I don't think I can do it just yet. I'm gonna have to revisit the film, but based on what I've watched thus far, I just can't bring myself to take Ty Simpson in the first round. Some of these teams may be compelled to do so anyway. You want to take advantage of the 5th-year option, right? For one. But you might not have a choice. You look at the New York Jets, right? They're sitting, unfortunately, of course, the players want to win. They want to compete. These are professionals that want to compete. But they find themselves in the two-hole, and honestly, I think Mendoza is the only quarterback that I feel comfortable taking in the first round, right? And I fully expect him to go first overall to the Raiders. So where does that put the Jets? Right now, they have a bevy of draft capital, and they can maneuver the board. They don't necessarily have to take a quarterback second overall. I wouldn't. So where does that leave Ty Simpson? I think when it's all said and done, Ty Simpson does get selected in the first round. I just can't do it from my perspective. I'm not sure that I would do it. I think he and Trinidad Chandler are much closer than people want to discuss, generally speaking. And I wonder if at least from my perspective, I might roll the dice on Chandler's upside as compared to Simpson, particularly in terms of how they deal with pressure. I think that's when Simpson, his play, kind of nosedives. It's a bit of a precipitous fall off when he's pressure. He's moved off his spot, whereas Chandler's, I think, does a much better job off script. So we'll keep an eye on Ty Simpson, but I think definitely a power move to enter the draft. Carnell Tate, Avion Terrell. When you talk about playmakers, that's what comes to mind with Terrell. He always gets his hands on the ball, he forces fumbles, INTs, so on and so forth. Dylan Thineman from Oregon, I thought perhaps he might return. And it's interesting because I buried the lead. I'm just going to go ahead and give you the name. Obviously, Dante Moore, starting quarterback from Oregon, has decided to return to Oregon, right? So clearly, Oregon's season didn't end the way they wanted. They got embarrassed. They got embarrassed by Indiana. Second time they're playing, and this time it was all Indiana. I expect quite a few prospects that otherwise would have entered the draft to return to Oregon. Dinniman wasn't one of them. He's deciding to go pro. I do think he has a outside chance of being a first round selection, but I think he'll go top 50 or so. The Amore Washingtons, right? Mateo Ngalele, there's some names again in that bottom of the first round, early parts of the second round conversation that apparently are returning to school because everybody's trying to make that run. And then of course, with the advent of NIL, you don't have to go and rush to the NFL, right? If you're one of those players, you're one of those players that are receiving significant compensation, then you can make the decision. You can make the decision to stay another year in school. And when we're talking about Oregon, we're talking about Phil Knight, Nike. There's no shortage of resources over there. So interesting. It's certainly expected more Oregon names to enter the draft, but after the season ended the way they did, Dante Moore returning back to school, I think you have a situation where quite a few NFL draft prospects, guys that would be picked within the first 50 or 75 selections, are going to go back to school. Josiah Trotter, Jordan Tyson, who I currently have as my top receiver. Antonio Williams is a really intriguing name. I really like the player, but he, over the last couple of seasons, he's dealt with injury. So that's going to depress his draft stock. Peter Woods, another standout from Clemson. You got Colin Wright, and then Torian York out of Texas A&M. So I wanted to go back to the conversation around Dante Moore and the move to remain at Oregon and how that impacts the NFL drafts. I mentioned the Jets, right? I did a mock draft recently where I had Mendoza going to the Raiders first overall, and then I followed that up with Dante Moore going to the Jets. Now, when I made that selection and I was articulating the analysis, behind that, I did cop to the fact that I think that Moore would benefit from going back to school, right? I think he has the tools. I think he has the requisite ability. I would be willing to take him second overall in the hopes of being able to perhaps sit him, especially in New York where they've had trouble, fielding quality quarterbacks. Even guys who've demonstrated that they're good in other places have struggled as a member of the Jets. So you want to set him up for success. You want to make sure you have the requisite, supporting cast, offensive line, receivers, so on and so forth. I think the addition of Adonai Mitchell, perhaps year two, Mason Taylor, get Garrett Wilson back healthy. You got Brees Hall in the backfield. There's some young pieces, particularly at the tackle position in New York, that you like. I thought that they could build it up. One of the main things, and this is something that I've mentioned before regarding Aaron Glenn, is that he needs to get the offensive coordinator higher right. The gentleman that he had, calling the plays this past season, to me, it was his first crack at it. Did not go particularly well. I would want to go in a different direction. These coaches get short hooks. First-time coaches in particular, head coaches in particular, they get very short hooks. So you got to make the right decision there. But with Moore deciding to go back to Oregon, it really changes the landscape of things, right? I don't think Simpson is close enough to Dante Moore or Fernando Mendoza, for that matter, to select him second overall. That said, the Jets have a lot of draft capital. They have multiple first-round picks. There's several teams in the 2026 NFL draft with a quarterback need, with multiple first-round selections. So could we see Ty Simpson end up in New York, with their pick in the teens, or perhaps trading back into the bottom of the first round to select him? I think all of that is very plausible. I think that's very plausible, but not an ideal situation for the Jets. That said, and again, this is kind of the rock and the hard place when you think about GM and head coach and trying to keep your job and build towards something. I did the Jets brass hasn't always demonstrated a lot of patience. Most NFL organizations, owners do not demonstrate a lot of patience. I would want to, again, I'm comfortable with you selecting Simpson, Chambliss. I think there's some other names. Mensa's going back to school. There's some other names that I would consider day two, and see if perhaps one of those guys can kind of acquit themselves, right? Add a new veteran to the mix, and see what happens from that perspective, and then dip your toe back into it in 2027 where you have, again, quite a bit of draft capital. I just don't know that these guys have that long of a leash at the end of the day, right? I think they're compelled to address their quarterback position sooner or later, and that could result in overdrafting a guy like Ty Simpson, at least in my mind. So, um, lot of different implications. The other aspect, and this isn't necessarily associated with the player going to be entering the draft, but Dylan Raiola, the 5-star prospect who ultimately went to Nebraska for his first couple of seasons, he is transferred to Oregon. And the question is, well, did he know that Dante Moore was going to come back to school or what have you? I believe there was a conversation that there was a very real possibility that Moore would return, right? And I think Raiola is looking at it through the prism of Dante Moore, right? Moore started his career a very highly touted 5-star prospect, started his career at UCLA, flamed out, transferred to Oregon because the talent was always there, just did not have the success, didn't have the supporting cast, didn't have the coaching. Transfers to Oregon, sits behind Dylan Gabriel, right? Gets his opportunity in 2025. And then, of course, we're talking about him perhaps being the second overall pick in the NFL draft, assuming he enters the NFL draft. Of course, he doesn't, right? I think Raiola is looking at it very similarly, right? I know what I can do. I know what I'm capable of, but, you know, very much at the NFL level, it always plays out like this. There's certainly, parallels to the collegiate game, right? You got to be in a good system. You got to have playmakers around you in order to be able to demonstrate those abilities, right? Yes, you touch the ball in every play, but the purpose of the role that the quarterback plays is distributing the football, right? So I think Raiola recognizing the success with the decision that Moore made in terms of sitting and transferring, ultimately transferring to Oregon, he could follow a similar trajectory. So we'll see how that all plays out, man. But really interesting stuff. And like I said, the decision of Dante Moore going back to school looms large. It has, like I said, reverberating impact on the 2026 NFL draft. It really changes the landscape in my mind. In my mind, it does. All right. So I think where I would like to go next is talk a little bit about the NFL playoffs, right? And of course, Wild Card Weekend has come and gone. Let's talk a little bit about those matchups. I thought there were a lot of really, especially prior to the Monday night game, right? The Monday night game was very much one-sided. New England, Los Angeles, low-scoring affair, pretty one-sided. Um, but I thought most of the games from Wild Card Weekend were incredibly entertaining, hotly contested games that came down to last possessions. Really, really, really intriguing, captivating football through Wild Card Weekend. So let's talk a little bit about that, shall we? All right, let me pull it up, and we'll start with the Bears and Packers, man. Right? It's the cardiac Bears at the end of the day. It really is the cardiac Bears because Caleb Williams, for whatever reason, man, there's belief. There's belief, and we've always talked about it here at the channel as far as his playmaking ability, doing things off script, but he has a belief, and Ben Johnson has his team believing that they're never out of the game. You enter the second half down 21-3 and you ultimately win 31-27. I believe that's what it was. I could be maybe a little bit off on that score, but significant big time comeback, man. Big time comeback. And Caleb Williams had a throw where he rolls to the left, throws off balance, contorts his body on fourth down. This game on the line. Game hangs in the balance that, it just goes to show. It just goes to show what we saw at USC, although it didn't necessarily always result in wins. There was just a natural playmaking ability that you could not pass up, and in a very good quarterback class, he ultimately went first overall. Of course, year one, poor coaching, poor circumstances. We're talking about that. Talking about situations matter for all players, but certainly the quarterback position. You get quality coaching. You get an improved running game, offensive line, and you're now starting to see that Caleb Williams is on that track of stardom. He's on that track. It's exactly what we expected. You don't always get to see that when a quarterback is taking first overall. He goes to a team that is picking first overall, right? Albeit that was by a product of a trade with the Panthers. The Bears' own pick was in the top 10, so they weren't a great football team by any stretch of the imagination. But really impressive stuff I thought Jordan Love played really well in that game. Save for perhaps that last throw, I thought Jordan Love was sharp. He was sharp in that particular game. His teammates let him down. His teammates let him down. There were some critical drops in that second half. I think the a back may have put the ball on the ground if I remember correctly. So yeah, Green Bay perhaps underachieved a bit this year, especially with Detroit having taken a step back, missing the playoffs. The natural thought, especially with the addition of Michael Parsons. Of course, Parsons got hurt. Big problem, big issue, right? I think this is Parsons was supposed to be, one of the main catalysts for this championship run. They missed him. They missed him because I think Parsons gets Williams down on the ground a couple of times, right? And ultimately, the Bears come out with this win. Of course, this is a big time historic matchup, and you could feel the energy. You could feel the energy at Soldier Field. San Francisco, Philadelphia, man. I don't know how the 49ers are doing it, man. I got to give a lot tip of the cap to Robert Sala and how he has these second and third string guys playing, man. They don't have their top or haven't had their top two defenders for the balance of the season and Nick Bosa and Fred Warner, right? And yet here they are still, double digit wins, go on the road, and you beat Philadelphia. And I don't think Brock Purdy played particularly well. I think Christian McCaffrey is a monster. He's not as explosive as he once was, but he carries this team, bro. He just carries them, right? On the ground, through the air. George Kittle got hurt in this game. I think it's his Achilles, so tough loss there. But I guess really the story is Philadelphia, man. I know all the Philadelphia fans are calling for the offensive coordinator's head. He should be out of there. He should be mashed out of there. Philadelphia has to make changes. I don't know if AJ Brown's going to be back. I think that relationship, I think that relationship may have deteriorated. I don't know if they're going to be able to reconcile. Head coach, quarterback, receiver. Um, the decision to force the ball to Goddard at the end of the game, right? It was a play that was easily defended. In my mind, and I get it, AJ Brown had some struggles. He had some drops in this game. In my mind, the ball either has to go to Brown or Devontae Smith, right? Whatever you draw up, the ball has to go to one of those guys, right? Um, I don't think Goddard's going to be back in Philadelphia. You know what I'm saying? But apparently, he was the player that Hurts trusted the most. Philadelphia never got their running game really on track this year, and this is the result. This is the result. So between play call and play design, I think that there may be some personnel concerns, right, on the offensive side of the ball. Especially in terms of AJ Brown's future, as well as the offensive line. Lane Johnson has dealt with injuries; he's been hurt. The interior of the offensive line hasn't been great. Philadelphia has work to do. They have work to do. They're going to have to get into this draft. Harry Roseman generally does a phenomenal job. They're going to have to get into this draft and figure it out. One of the players that I've had pegged for Philadelphia, assuming he's available, is Kenyon Sadiq out of Oregon, the tight end. Right? I think what he does a good job. Perhaps not a great job, but he does a good job in line. And then of course he can bring some additional athleticism, explosiveness to this passing game. Right? They've got to get more vertical in the passing game. And like I said, I don't understand why AJ Brown and Devontae Smith aren't being peppered with targets. And I think Jalen Hurts bears some of the responsibility, but I think play calling certainly was a big part of it. And certainly their inability to really get that running game on track, considering their offensive line, the fact that Saquon's in the backfield is very much a byproduct of the offensive scheme and cadence of play calling. So they're gonna have to look themselves in the mirror. San Francisco moves on, and Philadelphia's gonna have to go back and kind of gather themselves. But I certainly think their championship window is still open. I think it's still open. It's just starting to close. It's starting to close. A lot of roster attrition. We can expect more this year. How do those young guys come up? What do they do in terms of free agency? And Howie Roseman, can he nail another draft? He's definitely demonstrated the ability to do so. The Rams in Carolina perhaps was my favorite game to watch. Right, that Panthers defense, man, they just couldn't get the stop. They couldn't get the stop. They played pretty well. That I don't know that this score is indicative as to how well Carolina played. Puka's been too much, man. He was too much um, for the Panthers, but it was other guys. It was other guys, lesser known players. Cody Parkinson at the end of the game. Stafford made a great throw. Parkinson made a great catch for the go ahead touchdown. Carolina, like I said before, may have backed into the playoffs, but they are on the right track. The Ike Ekwonu injury is intriguing, or rather, is an interesting thing because of the timing of the injury, right? So I think Carolina largely thought their offensive line would be intact going into this offseason, but with Ike's injury, now perhaps offensive tackle needs to be prioritized, right? You have to protect Bryce Young. You got to protect him. So, whereas I was thinking perhaps you want to prioritize or rather lean in further in towards this improving, vastly improved Carolina's defense, a young group, hungry defense, really kind of, give it jet fuel. I'm thinking perhaps going back to the offensive line and stabilizing things up front may be the more prudent approach here entering the draft. As for the Rams continue to move on. The Rams got when I think about the Rams in terms of their ability to compete with anybody, I think with a healthy Stafford, you're always going to have a chance. You're always going to have a chance with a healthy Stafford. Their run defense remains a question mark, and I think the corner position too. I think the corner position too, and I don't like any of that comes as a surprise to Rams fans. You got a pair of first round picks. Do you go get Ty Simpson to be the heir apparent? I think you prioritize, perhaps replacing a tackle up front, maintaining that offensive line. Again, I don't know what Stafford's plans are long term. He's playing at such a high level. He's going to be the NFL MVP. I would assume he would continue playing, but I don't know. I don't know. McVay may have a better pulse on that. So that's where the whole quarterback conversation comes in. But if I have Stafford in tow, I may look for a quarterback day too. I may, regardless, I'll probably look for a quarterback day too. With those two first round selections, give me one of these corners. Like I said, it's a really good class. Really like how they challenge receivers at the line of scrimmage. Give me one of those corners, and perhaps the offensive tackle. I think you could certainly add some interior defensive linemen, be better at the point of attack, especially in the run game, and even second level defenders. There's a lot of good linebackers in this class, and guys who I think would bolster the second level of the Rams defense. I think they could stand to improve there. So a lot of options for the Rams. We'll see how it all plays out. I think a lot of it is contingent upon whether or not Stafford ultimately will be back for the 2026-2027 season. Excuse me. All right. I mentioned New England, Los Angeles, a bit of a low scoring affair. I think I don't know, man. The Chargers they remain to be they remain an enigma. I know they weren't at full strength. They're down their two tackles. Excellent offensive tackles. Just for whatever reason, the Chargers just struggle to field a healthy offensive line. The interior of the offensive line does need work. And I think their defense, the front seven, needs some love. I don't know that there's any edge rushers under contract other than Thule beyond the 2026 season. They could use more bodies to the interior. The Chargers have a little work to do, albeit they're a playoff team. They could effectively beat anybody any given week. They're that talented, especially when they're at full strength. But it just something's missing. Something's missing. I don't know if it's Herbert in the big game. I'm not sure what it is, but something is missing. I think they need to have a very strong, as all 32 teams do, but they in particular need to have a strong draft so that they don't lose ground, right? This year, they managed to be the second ranked team in the AFC West. It's not the first time they've been there, but Kansas City certainly took a significant step back. Denver has obviously, overtaken the Chargers. They were the top seed in the AFC, let alone the AFC West. So the Chargers need to be careful. They need to be careful so that they don't lose ground in that division out there in the AFC conference. Um, But in order to do so, they need to have a strong draft. New England, I think New England is playing with house money. I think New England's ahead of schedule, right? And I think the single biggest, I shouldn't say single, I think the two most important elements of this rapid turnaround is the development of Drake May, first and foremost, and the presence of Mike Vrabel. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I don't know what Tennessee was thinking letting Vrabel get out the door. It all started with the A.J. Brown trade. I know Vrabel did not like that. And then you let Derrick Henry go, and then it's just one thing after the other. I don't understand it. Vrabel has paid his dues. He's been a position coach, coordinator. He went down to the collegiate level. He has earned his stripes, despite on top of the fact that he's a player's coach. He's played the game at the highest level. He's won at the highest level. The teams just respond to Mike Vrabel, and I thought those Tennessee teams probably played above their heads. I'm talking about Ryan Tannehill. Let's be honest. Like those teams played above their heads. I think they're in uniquely positioned to really sustain this thing out there in New England, considering that young quarterback, and of course they field a defense that is very physical, right? And when I talk about we talk about this game of football, we talk about X's and O's and matchups and so on and so forth. All those things are important, but there's still a certain element of physicality that has to be in place. And generally speaking, the teams that are more disciplined and more physical tend to win more frequently. That's just the reality of it. The finesse football does not necessarily translate into winning football in January. Just doesn't. So, like what the Patriots are building, Buffalo comes away with a win. I thought Jacksonville had a great season, all things considered. Travis Hunter going down, mid-season. They found their stride, right? They figured out, the best way to deploy Travis Etienne. Trevor Lawrence was playing better. The defense was opportunistic, and they just got in their own way against Buffalo. I think they had Buffalo on the ropes. Buffalo is a flawed team. Josh Allen is terrific. James Cook is phenomenal. But they have question marks in terms of being able to effectively push the ball down the field. Now, Brandon Cooks played well. He's been a nice addition here late in the season. I don't know that will be able to be sustained throughout the playoffs, but certainly he made a difference in this game. I like the pieces they have on defense, but they still struggle to run the ball. And when they face the likes of a New England, a Texans team, but Buffalo's going to have trouble. They're going to have trouble because again, those teams are super physical and they can run the football. And Buffalo still hasn't necessarily solved for that. Jacksonville, as I mentioned, got in its own way because they stopped running the ball. I think they were averaging over 6 yards a carry in this game, and they just got away from it for whatever reason. Liam Cohen, young coach, first year head coach, got a bit pass happy, got away from what was working, could have salted this game away, shortened the game. They didn't. They come out on the losing end. So I will say this: Jacksonville is ahead of schedule, right? You were picking fifth overall. They traded up to the second overall pick. They put together a great season. Now the question is, can you sustain it? Is it a flash in the pan? It's seemingly that Trevor Lawrence has turned a corner, right? I think the system that he's in, led by Liam Cohen, is really he's really taken to it. He really found his way. I think they should re-up with Travis Etienne, keep that thing together. You get Hunter back. You get Brian Thomas with his head on straight. Parker Washington was phenomenal. Jacoby Myers, you already decided to extend him. I think they've got some really good pieces. I think they've got some really good pieces. They probably can tweak some things on defense, maybe let a couple players walk. But Jacksonville is poised to kind of have some staying power here, right? So encouraged by what they're doing there in Duval. I mentioned again, I think Buffalo, we'll see how it works out in these playoffs. I think their lack of being able to push the football down the field on a consistent basis and their inability to stop the run is going to ultimately be their undoing. Maybe they put it together for a couple of games and are able to get over the hump, but I just feel like those are clearly defects associated with this roster, this team that they need to address in the offseason, namely the NFL draft. The last wild card matchup here, man, was between the Texans and Steelers, and it was all Texans, right? All Texans defense, effectively. Of course, Mike Tomlin has decided to step down from the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm not sure where he'll end up, but I think whatever team ultimately gets Mike T will be better for it. They'll be absolutely better for it. His counterpart there for the better parts of 2 decades, um, John Harbaugh, excuse me, John Harbaugh, formerly of the Baltimore Ravens. He's now the head coach of the New York Giants. So I think the Giants certainly will get their CEO to come in there and get his fingerprints all over that team. I'm curious. I'm curious as to where Tomlin ultimately ends up. I think certainly Atlanta would be a great landing spot. That young team, I think having him with that young team could do a world of wonders. Now I think getting the right coordinator there with Michael Penix goes a long way, and I think ultimately, I believe that's what was the undoing. Pittsburgh, no losing seasons ever in the Mike Tomlin era. We're talking 19, 20 years, right? Unheard of, right? But no playoff wins in the last 9 years, decade since you had a playoff win, right? Generally speaking, when your Hall of Fame quarterback, i.e., Roethlisberger, retires, things go south. Things go south, right? And it never got to the point where it was like, okay, the sky is falling, but there's a standard. There's a standard in Pittsburgh, and they had not achieved it. They had not achieved it. Perhaps the message that got stale. I personally believe. I think it's less about the message. I think it personally that they had not been able to figure out the quarterback position. Right. Rodgers was able to pump a little blood into this offense, but certainly not enough. And they've struggled. They've struggled. It's been a revolving door. They tried it with Kenny Pickett. They've done the Mason Rudolph thing. They've done a number of different amalgamations. Russell Wilson, the battery of Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. It just they've never gotten it right since Roethlisberger, and I think ultimately that's the reason why they haven't had the postseason success that they would have hoped for. So, lots of changes in the NFL, and lots of uh, NFL draft implications. I just mentioned the Steelers quarterback situation. Rodgers will be what 44. I don't know, especially considering that Tomlin won't be there. I don't know that Rodgers is going to want to play for whomever they bring in as head coach, let alone, he might feel like, this is it. I don't want to necessarily go through another off season and so on and so forth. And I got to have my guys bought in. I know Rodgers doesn't necessarily need it, considering that he's seen just about everything, but he's not the same player he was. He's not an MVP caliber quarterback anymore. He's a decent veteran at this point, right? And he can give you some peaks and stabilize things, but nothing great. A lot of throws at the line of scrimmage, like this. He's not the answer at the end of the day. That's just the reality of the situation. So, what the Steelers do at quarterback, and again, they're not positioned to necessarily do much here in the NFL draft, nor do I think it'd be prudent, especially in the first round. Um, that's going to be the main question mark. That again, like I said, has led to their lack of success here in these playoffs over the last decade or so. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the matchups going forward, and we'll end it on this note. So we got a pair of matchups on either side of the bracket. San Fran, obviously very familiar with Seattle, divisional foe. This will be their third matchup. Um, I'm not sure, man. Like Seattle is defense is phenomenal. So I fully expect this to be a low scoring affair. Okay. Um, the reason why I think it'll be a low scoring affair is because I don't trust Sam Darnold. You know what I mean? Now, if Seattle, whom found their running game towards the end of the season, they really did. If they lean on Kenneth Walker, you sprinkle in Charbonnet, play action with Darnold, JSN. I think they hold serve and win this game because they're just so good defensively. Mike McDonald has that team jamming defensively. I think they're strong in their kicking game. San Francisco doesn't do anything great outside of Christian McCaffrey. Not having George Kittle, as that end line blocker, it makes a difference. And I don't, and as well as San Francisco's reserves have played on the defensive side of the ball, I don't know if they're going to be able to hold up to that degree. I think they're going to do a good job. Like I said, I think it's going to be bet the under, right? But I don't think they're going to be able to hold up against the physicality of the Seattle Seahawks. Ultimately, the Rams at Bears. this is a really intriguing matchup because the Bears feature a potent rushing attack. I think immediately you think about just the natural talent as throwers of the football in this matchup between Stafford and Caleb Williams. These guys are special in terms of spinning that football. But in fact, both teams run the football well, and they're not necessarily sterling against the run. So I think whoever can control the line of scrimmage, right, and run the football in this game, will most effectively will ultimately win the game. I think again, turnover differential always plays a key role. You can just kind of put a pin in that particular element of the matchup, any matchup, but I think this game is going to come down to perhaps one of the quarterbacks making a play late. It's the NFL generally results in one score games, but the running game through the balance of the game, the length or rather the duration of the game, whichever team can establish to run better, I think ultimately wins. Buffalo Denver is a toss up to me, man, because like I said, Buffalo is such an enigma, right? I don't know if the Broncos run the ball as effectively as they need to in order to beat Buffalo. If I'm not mistaken, Buffalo is favored on the road. There's a 6 seed facing the 1 seed, but they're favored on the road, if I'm not mistaken. So there's clearly the hesitation associated with Bo Nix and this Broncos offense relative to Josh Allen and their running game, despite the fact that they're not necessarily an explosive passing game. The Broncos defense may have something to say about that, though, right? Now, how do you mitigate the Broncos defense in that really excellent pass rush? You get the ball out quickly, and that's the name of the game there in Buffalo, right? There's a lot of throws at or behind the line of scrimmage. Um, Josh Allen can hurt you with his legs. You know what I mean? So it'll be interesting to see how this is matched up. I think the area in which you attack Buffalo in particular is you challenge them at the line of scrimmage in terms of their receivers. Denver clearly has the personnel for that, right? Can their second level defenders, spill and fill, and stop James Cook? That's going to be a question mark. And on the other side of the ball, can they run the football? Can they take some pressure off of Bo Nix? You don't want to get into a situation where Bo Nix has to throw the ball 40 times. Not to say that he's not capable of it, but that's playing into the hands of Buffalo's defense. You want to run the football. You want to keep Josh Allen on the sideline. You want to keep that Bills offense on ice. You don't want them to get into a rhythm. So another very intriguing matchup. And then strength on strength, Texans and Patriots. Strength on strength, man. Both these teams have excellent defenses. I think the Texans have the edge in terms of pass rush. So that's something to watch out. Can they get to Drake May with 4? Can they get to him with 4? I think May has done a good job against the blitz. Whichever team, and again, you could say this about any matchup, whichever team is able to establish the line of scrimmage, certainly will have an edge. But this is good on good in terms of physicality and defense. Um, the Texans are excellent. Every level of the defense, they're excellent. I really love the young secondary that they boast. Gonzalez has been cleared from concussion protocol with the Patriots. I think that's big, and I don't know if Nico Collins is playing, so that may loom large. I know Christian Kirk had a big week last week, but not having Nico Collins would be an issue. It certainly would be an issue. So that's one to look out for as well. So all the matchups are unique and interesting. As I mentioned before, I think teams that the team that tends to be the most physical one tends to be the winner when it's all said and done. And you look across the landscape, Seattle, San Francisco, certainly, albeit they don't necessarily have all of their stars. Seattle, Denver, New England, Houston, those are some physical football teams. I think Buffalo's rushing attack is quite dynamic and physical as well. So something to look at. And don't sleep on Los Angeles in terms of physicality. I think all the teams that remain in this tournament effectively have a certain level of physicality, whether it be at the line of scrimmage on both sides of it or in terms of one side of the ball. So looking forward to it. Looking forward to it. Hope everyone enjoyed this particular showcase, this particular edition of the Second Half Draft Show. I hope to be back next week. So have a great weekend.